Sarc Fighter podcast, the story of two people who were so fed up with sarcoidosis, they decided to do something about it.
And that was so incredibly frustrating because I knew there was something wrong with me, and I knew that nobody really was digging into what was wrong with me.
And it was very difficult to find people either in New York or outside of New York who really knew a lot about Sarc and were able to give experience of treating patients.
The voices of Andrea Wilson and her husband, Reading, the people who started the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research after Andrea's terrible bout with the disease. I'll ask her about how she fought through strokes and heart attacks while she and Reading created the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, the leading voice in the fight against the disease.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome to the Sarc Fighter podcast. This is where all of us who are fighting Sarc, myself included, can gather and learn from one another, hear stories of other people who might be suffering from the disease and learn how they have or haven't adapted to their new life once Sarc has hijacked it. And that's what I call it. I think it's a hijacking. It moves in slowly, and the next thing you know, it's controlling your life. You don't go where you want to go. You go where sarcoidosis allows you to go. And that's one of the huge problems with this illness. It affects everybody differently. They call it the snowflake disease because no two snowflakes are the same, and no two patients' experience with sarcoidosis are the same. So that's why we're here. That's what we're here to talk about, and I'm happy to be the host of the Sarc Fighter podcast. My name is John Carlin. So this is episode 11. And I am thrilled now to watch the number of downloads increasing every week. People are finally discovering the Sarc Fighter podcast, and I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you can help spread the word by sharing links to the podcast on maybe your social media. And really, of course, I would love it if you would want to reach out to me and become a part of this conversation. Many of you have found me via email, and all my contact info is in the show notes. So please don't hesitate to send me an email. Tell me your story. Tell me if maybe you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast and share your story with other folks. A lot of people do that on forums, but this is a way to do that, and we actually get to hear your voice and get to know you a little better. It's just a little bit more involved, but podcasting is a new and great way to help spread the word about anything. But in this case, we're all about sarcoidosis. Okay, today I have an amazing treat for you. In fact, I'm just really humbled and honored that we have today Reading and Andrea Wilson. 20 years ago, after Andrea was meandering through various phases of misdiagnosis, they eventually figured out that she had sarcoidosis. They had good insurance, they had means, and there still was no recourse. There was no place that they could go. There was seemingly no help. And so they started the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research at their kitchen table. And today, they have many of the world's leading medical minds working on the FSR Advisory Board. They are the key fundraising organization. They work with pharmaceutical companies to either help them advance their research or to get them on board to begin research. They're working with young researchers and trying to get them to enter the medical community as original sarcoidosis researchers or specialists, so they don't get in as one thing and then learn about sarcoidosis and 10 years later deviate to it. They want them to start their careers working on sarcoidosis. And those are the types of avenues that the medical community really needs to take if we are to be successful in finding treatments for this disease or this illness. But just imagine how few resources we have today, and then go back 20 years pre-FSR, and how many fewer there were then. And I know I've heard from a lot of people who've had Sarc for more than 20 years, and at least there are more options now than there were. I still feel like it's a very limited menu that doctors can work from when they're trying to give you prescriptions. Usually it starts with prednisone. Somebody the other day called prednisone the devil's Tic Tacs, referring to the little white pills that we take. It makes your life just miserable, makes you miserable, but it stops Sarc. And then you usually wean yourself off of that and get onto another medication. And I'm getting off on sidebars, but it seems like you are trying to prevent yourself from having a Sarc flare-up, which can make your life miserable, by taking drugs that make your life, in many cases, just as miserable, if not more. I would say in 2019, I was about ready to just let Sarc have at me and give up all of the prednisone and everything that I was on. But at any rate, Andrea and Reading are here today to talk about their frustrations and also their successes. And really, that's the key today, is there are some significant successes. We are on the precipice of additional successes. I will mention that as I'm speaking right now, Reading is the interim executive director of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, while the search committee searches for the new leadership. And by the time you're listening to this, that new leadership may be in place. He didn't know, but shortly after our interview on the same day, he was planning to have a meeting with the search committee, and they're going to proceed. But the bottom line is that even after 20 years, when someone was needed to step up and run the organization in between leaders, Reading was right there and is still actively involved, and Andrea is still actively involved. And so really they are the leading voices as patient advocates for sarcoidosis all around the world. And I just want to thank them for coming on today. I will mention that one of the things they talk about, just a little bit of a teaser here, is in the early days when they were trying to raise money, they even used a camel at one point. You know, the big animal with humps, a camel? Yeah. Don't really know how they came to that, but apparently it worked, because here they are. So, Andrea and Reading Wilson, the founders of FSR, coming up on the Sarc Fighter podcast. The Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is the nation's leading nonprofit organization dedicated to finding a cure for this disease and to improving care for sarcoidosis patients worldwide. Since its establishment in 2000, FSR has fostered over $5 million in sarcoidosis-specific research efforts and has provided disease education and support for thousands of individuals navigating life with sarcoidosis. Learn more about FSR and how they're supporting those impacted by this disease at www.stopsarcoidosis.org. At this time, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce here on the Sarc Fighter podcast, Andrea and Reading Wilson, the founders of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you,
We're delighted
John.
to be with you.
Thank you so much for having us. It really is a treat to be here.
This is so cool and such an honor. Really, you guys have done so much. The organization is now 20 years old, right?
Yes. Yeah. We're in our 20th year right now.
Yeah. And I know that it was born from the frustration that many of our listeners are suffering right now, because there are so few answers when it comes to sarcoidosis. But 20 years ago, when you all launched this organization, there were even fewer answers. And it must have been extremely frustrating because everybody I talk to talks about years and years of misdiagnosis and doctors not knowing what's going on with them and then not having any solutions. And Andrea, I know you are also a Sarc fighter, or Sarc warrior, as we like to say. I say Sarc fighter because of the name of the podcast, but Sarc warrior is what you hear more often. So why don't you, if you don't mind, share with the listeners a little bit about your struggle, the symptoms, the onset, and where you found yourself 20 years ago.
Sure. I'd love to. So basically 20 years ago, I went from being a very healthy, athletic person with, basically nothing holding me back from really reaching any goals I set physically. And so to basically being short of breath, I was fatigued easily, I was dizzy, I was having trouble going out. I was recently married to this guy here, and we started our new married life in New York. And I found myself so tired that we couldn't go out together in crowds specifically, which was very weird. And I was passing out, and I went to a variety of doctors who said, you know what, you're in a new city, you're a female, and it must just be, I have no idea what the female part had to do with it.
Right.
You need more iron. Then, I dug into it a little bit more, and they thought maybe I had a tumor at the base of my skull, the top of my spine, and was treated for Meniere's disease for many years. And we just couldn't find any answers. So basically I was sort of blown off. And that was so incredibly frustrating because I knew there was something wrong with me, and I knew that nobody really was digging into what was wrong with me. And anytime I went to a doctor and said, we just need to keep digging and, keep on going, and I kept pushing them, they just sort of pushed back and said, they disregarded what I had to say.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, you've gone on for years, and the word sarcoidosis hasn't been mentioned.
No, not at all.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it was not until a wonderful doctor named Francis Adams in New York City pegged it and said, you need to have a chest x-ray. And finally, after having that, he took a bronchoscopy and confirmed sarcoidosis. And then the treatment began.
But that was just the beginning of the Odyssey.
Right. And then, which is then something that's so common to most of the listeners, I thought, okay, great. Now I know what I'm dealing with. I can treat it, and then we'll move on. But I was very wrong.
Yeah, that's like the beginning of the bad news, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, congratulations, you have an incurable disease.
Right, exactly. Right. And then every time we kind of dug into, I think at that point it was, the Merck manual or, something like that, we couldn't find anything juicy or meaty to find it. Basically it said you have a disease of unknown etiology. And I called everybody, friends of mine, parents of my friends, and trying to dig deeper into what this disease was. And nobody knew anything. Nobody that I knew more than what they learned in med school, which is just a teeny blurb.
Right, which was that about all that was out there.
Right.
Yes, this is before the internet.
That teeny blurb is it, right? So Reading, you're the caregiver through all of this. What are you thinking?
Well, it was a really difficult time, I think, in our lives because we were both young, and when you're young, I think you feel differently about the world and optimistic, and you're busy in your career and building a life. And we were newlyweds, and so we were enjoying being newlyweds. And so this kind of threw a wrench in the plan. You have a plan in your mind of this is what things are going to be like, and all of a sudden there's a kink in the plan.
So what you thought after. So
we had to pivot. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, Reading said he thought initially I'm always the glasses half full person, and he's the glasses half empty person. So he said after the bronchoscopy, after we figured out what it was, he sort of went dark and thought, okay, what am I going to say at her funeral?
Oh, wow.
And so that was kind of a scary thing. I mean, I certainly wasn't thinking that way, but he said he just immediately went to oh my God, she has a lung disease. What the heck is that?
Right. Well, there was a lot we didn't know, obviously, and I think in the pre-internet days, it was very difficult to get information, and then certainly a lot of clinicians, in New York City, where obviously huge city, lots of great healthcare, lots of great doctors. You would think everything is at your fingertips, and it was very difficult to find people either in New York or outside of New York who really knew a lot about Sarc and were able to give experience of treating patients. And so we began looking and trying to figure it out. Andrea started her treatment regimen and obviously had the ups and downs of the prednisone and all the other things that they were trying and the side effects of that. So, it was a trying time. Bottom line, it was a trying time. We wanted to start a family at some point. And so, finally one great doctor, Andrea had a lovely GP who said, hey, I think you got a little window here, so go for it if you want to have children, because this might be your only window.
Yeah, I think she probably had an inkling. Oh, sorry.
One at a time, maybe. And so that was, so we started a family, and we were blessed to have Maddie, our daughter, who's now actually today turning 25. So wow. It's her birthday, and she was conceived in New York City and born in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's been a long odyssey, but we've gotten better at dealing with it, I think.
So at some point, though, you looked around and said, this isn't good enough. There's not enough medical information. There aren't enough resources available for people. We want to do something about it. And so how did you set about that task?
We bandied the idea around for a little while. We were in Chicago at this point. My career had taken us through New York City and Charlotte and then back to Chicago, where Andrea and I both went to school and had met. And we just looked at each other and we said, hey, if we have good health, if we have access to good health care, and if we have, the way and the ability to access it and still have had a difficult time trying to figure this out, think about all the other folks out there that are just not in the same boat, and we need to do something. So we said one night, I think we were looking at each other before we went to bed, and we were like, let's do this. And didn't know anything about a foundation. We actually got a book about starting a 501c3 and, what do you do and what do you don't? And so we actually started following the prescription, and it was very local, grassroots, friends and family, awareness events and fundraisers and things of that nature. We did one in Charlotte. We called them KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. So we'd have a kind of the what we used to say was the not rubber chicken fundraising event. We'd have the anti-rubber chicken fundraising event. And
anti-rubber chicken black tie event that people get to go to.
Yes.
So we had a lot of fun doing that and raising awareness, and it started to build some momentum, and we realized that we were the only organization that was really kind of pulling a lot of this together, and so we could do more, and there was a need for more. Right.
And I think we started off thinking we're not going to have this as just a small kind of homey, right. Well, and those local support groups are very, very important.
Yes.
But what we wanted to do was we really felt like we needed to make a big splash. And we thought, we spent a lot of time thinking about it and really kind of came up with a business plan. We spoke to a lot of people in the medical community, in the sarcoid community, excuse me. And before we did it, we traveled around, excuse me, when I was feeling well, and just to backtrack a little, when I was on, I think almost an 18-month round of chemo. And so I was kind of down for the count on some of this sort of experimental chemo treatments. And so I thought, if I'm having a really tough time with this and am insured and can travel around and so forth, what about people who can't? And I'm having a horrible time with it. And I just thought, this really, we need to make this loud. We need to help others who can't help themselves. So Reading and I traveled around and spoke to all of the really strong physicians in the Sarc arena. and said, hey, look, if we put this foundation together, we really need you as a backbone. And they were so amazing and said, absolutely, we are there. Just tell us what to do. And to this day, they're still there. And we are just so grateful to them. And so they became our scientific advisory board and are still with us, many of them. So that has been tremendous. Our board has changed a little bit, but initially it really was so grassroots, like born out of our bedroom in our apartment. And then, we're running and staying up most of the night, hashing stuff out at our kitchen table. And some of our first fundraisers, we're thinking, all right, we don't want to have those horrible fundraisers where everyone's bored and they have to get dressed up and they really
don't enjoy it.
Don't want to go.
Don't learn anything.
Right, exactly. Right. And if people are going to come out, we're going to make sure that they know how to pronounce sarcoid, they know what it is, and there's going to be some takeaway.
Exactly.
So, we at one of our fundraisers, we had live camels, a 40-pound snake, and a monkey. And
really?
Just to entice people. I'll see if I can find those photos somewhere.
Did that work?
It worked. People were like, oh my God, I am coming. And we had a theme for every single party. And so people were like, oh God, I am definitely going to come.
So where'd you get the camel?
Somewhere in Chicago.
Okay. All right, cool.
But I think what was neat about it, John, was as we did these kind of grassroots events, friends and family, we'd hear about a friend who had a friend who had sarcoidosis, or we'd hear about a friend whose brother or sister or coworker had sarcoidosis. And
people we've known for years.
These stories just started to bubble up very quickly. And it became apparent that there were a lot of people in this boat. And I think that gave us a lot of inspiration to really, as Andrea said, try to be something different. We wanted patients to be aware, to be more educated about the disease, how they could get help, how they could seek it, and understand the disease that they had, but also to try to begin trying to drive some research, because that's where ultimately we hope, you can develop a new drug or something that could be curative and better than what exists today, which is, frontline prednisone and other immunosuppressants. So I think a big part of what we were hoping to do is to become strong enough and financially viable enough that we could begin to support research and do more than just, kind of have a local organization. And
although those are very important.
Sure. And we needed to work with those that were, obviously existing at that time and help them and help each other. So we just kind of saw this momentum, and we saw that there was nothing there in the space already. And so we needed to fill that void. And that was really, I think, a key element.
And to streamline basically so going back to when I was first diagnosed, there seemed to be just a lack of information about the disease. Then all of a sudden there became, more information about Sarc, but then some disinformation or some incorrect information. So then we felt as though we really needed to kind of wrangle that information and streamline it, make sure that people had the correct information, much like, what's going on with COVID right now. Right. There's a lot of different information about masks, about how you get it, potential treatments. So what we want to do is sort of have an umbrella organization under which all of these other, interests and groups can be, but that we can sort of be the clearinghouse for it and get all of, kind of streamline the information.
Right. So you're doing the fundraisers, you've got the camels, which I think is hilarious. And people are coming and they're donating, and you're starting to build a little pot of money. And now we've got a scientific advisory board, and they're doctors and they're trying to guide it. But now you've got to do something with that money and that expertise. So how did the organization then evolve to where it is today with 12 or 13 employees and an annual budget that's a couple of $1 million? bigger than that?
Yeah, probably closer to between 3 and 4, depending
3
on
and 4.
how you look at different. So we hired our first executive director in Chicago, and she was with us for 5 years, helping us grow. And then we obviously had become a bigger organization. We had a full-time development director at that point. We obviously had the scientific advisory board and others. And then we hired our second executive director when our first left us, and we really began to build momentum there and add the team, which is now, as you pointed out, closer to about 8 or 9 people, both full-time equivalents and part-timers working with us. And our ability to, get out there and speak on both a nationwide basis and a global basis really was happening. And so, as you pointed out, the budget has grown, the capabilities of the organization have grown. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but we hired very bright, smart people that have been on the whole with us for more than 5 years, and they've grown and they're passionate about sarcoidosis. So I've got to take my hat off because the team is super dedicated and super smart, and the board has been fantastic and continues to grow and get stronger, and it's all kind of bubbled up.
So I think also that I think we keep honing keep looking at a strategic plan. We look and see what's going on in the sarcoid world, and then we go back again to our patients and look at what our patients need, which are better treatments. And we look and see what the need is in the field, which can be a disease model, which can be different programs to better help the patients. But in the end, really, better, like we've said, better
treatments for the patients.
Better treatments, better care.
Right. So right now, the organization, as that you've very successfully created this umbrella organization, with patient outreach and with the various summits that happen every year, where you go from city to city to city and you host patients and you host speakers. And I say you, I almost feel like I could say we, because I'm an advocate, right?
Yes.
But
thank you.
Sure. Oh my God. Yeah, thank you. Because like all the other people who are listening, I felt like, okay, and I've got a doctor, I know what I have, and for 3 or 4 months everything was fine, and then all of a sudden I'm realizing this isn't going to go away.
Right.
And then you start googling around a little bit more. You see some scary things, because some of the folks on the forums who are in a bad way, you think, oh, if that becomes me, my life is over as I know it. Which actually to some degree is true. But anyway, so getting back to the organization, we've got the umbrella. So you're fundraising, and now we've got the pharmaceutical companies kind of looking at cures for sarcoidosis. But I always, when I try to describe it, I think of like a 6'8" guy in the NBA who wants to be a guard. He's not big enough to be a forward, and he's too tall to be a guard. He's a tweener. And we impact a lot of people, but we're not cancer.
Right.
So the pharmaceutical companies, I think, kind of look past the opportunity with sarcoidosis because there's not enough potential upside, right? Isn't that a problem?
It is a problem. I think it's the economics of business for a pharmaceutical company, but I think a couple things have changed, which have helped since we started the organization. So, number one, I think the patients have to present themselves and make their case, which we're trying to help every day to coordinate the voices of our patients, so people on the other side of the table understand what this disease is and the implications of the disease. I think that's super important. And obviously FSR's mission is driven by the needs of the patients. The pharmaceutical companies obviously are vast, and they have many different compounds that they're constantly working with, or sometimes have on the shelf that maybe they're not doing anything with. And I think what we're trying to do as an organization is to entice those pharmaceutical companies to come into the sarcoid space to test a compound, whether it's a new compound or repurposing an existing compound, and to see if there is strong application. I think there are also, as you understand about Sarc, there are other, what I would call ancillary diseases. So, IPF or others that affect, your lungs could be similar in scientific ways and in the course of the disease to sarcoidosis. So maybe a treatment for that could be a treatment for sarcoidosis as well. So that's an avenue. But I think what happened when Hatch-Waxman was passed, which was a bill in Congress that allowed orphan diseases, so the patient populations in the U.S. of less than 250,000, at least defined, pharmaceutical companies can have an incentive to work on those diseases because they get a longer patent if indeed they develop something that they ultimately take to the public. So as opposed to a 4-year period, they get a 7-year period in which to have their exclusivity on that drug before it goes generic. And so that was an economic incentive that allowed those pharmas to begin looking closer at treating smaller patient populations. So that's kind of where we are today. But again, I think FSR's goal is to try to help bring more of these companies into the space, help them do a trial. So we've got our clinical studies network, which is a network of hospitals around the country and international that brings patients to these trials and helps the pharmas recruit and get these studies going quickly and executing them so we can move forward faster. I think that's the whole goal, is forward faster, get these, get things happening in the disease space that are going to benefit patients, but try to make it happen quickly because, as you know, drug development is it's a long process. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. These trials take a long time, and the FDA is getting FDA is sharp, and they're helping this process come along faster. But it still takes a lot of money and a lot of time, and we realize that, so we're just trying to be helpful and accretive to getting it done quicker.
Yeah, and I guess sarcoidosis compounds that because in 50% of the cases it goes away on its own.
Right.
So you don't know if it's medication that was effective or if it was just sarcoidosis being sarcoidosis.
Genetics, yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah.
So right now, you mentioned a disease model. For people who don't know what that is and why it's important, could you explain that?
I'm going to try my best. Neither Andrea and I are scientists, but so quite often in any disease, there is a model for developing a new compound and a way to determine if that compound is effective and to have endpoints that are really kind of understood across the whole, a broad spectrum of researchers. And so it's basically a way to take a new compound, run it through the model that you have that's basically been agreed to by all parties, if you will, and determine if that compound is really effective or not effective. And if a pharma has a way to look at a model and say, hey, we can test against this model and know definitively if we're on the right track or the wrong track, they're more inclined to come in and do the work. If there is no model, if there is no disease model, then it becomes a little more ambiguous. There's a lot more ambiguity about whether or not their compound is effective or not effective. And hence there's less desire on their part to come in and try that compound and spend the money, spend the time, run the trial, if there's no kind of construct in which they can determine if it's going to be successful or not, or to measure if it's going to be successful.
That was perfect.
So I think generally that's kind of what an animal model is, a disease model.
So it could be either animal or in a lab.
Right.
Okay.
And so
it's not necessarily a disease model. So it's not necessarily an animal model. So for instance, cancer has an animal model, which is a mouse, I think.
Mm-hmm.
No, nothing.
Okay.
So, and are we close to, isn't there a mouse model that's close for us?
Sarcoid cannot be replicated in a mouse, I don't believe.
Okay.
Right?
I feel like I'm remembering bits and pieces of the conversation.
All right, I'm not sure. Delete that. Okay, I'm not sure.
Well,
I do.
but isn't the NIH doesn't come in? We don't get major government funding until we have a disease model. Is that true?
It would certainly benefit us, and it would benefit researchers who obviously are trying to promote their research, because again, if you have a disease model which you can kind of use as your baseline, then it creates the ability for a researcher to test a new treatment against that model. And yes, so it creates more confidence for any, whether it's a pharmaceutical company or the NIH or NHLBI who's giving you grant money, R01 grant money, big money. It gives you the ability, or the researcher the ability to have a baseline to measure against. So FSR did initiate. We had 5 groups of researchers, both domestic and international, that we funded over a 2-year period. The total funding for all 5 was approximately $750,000, and each of them was researching a disease model. They all had different ideas. We selected 5 of what we thought were the best prospects out of a much larger list of applicants, if you will. And after a 2-year period last fall at ERS, the European Respiratory Society, they presented the findings that they had concluded over that 2-year period. And it was very encouraging. I think there's some really good work that's been done, and we want to find a way to continue to fund these folks, because it's not a finished product yet, but we think that we're moving the ball forward, and with a little more time and energy and money, obviously, we can ultimately get to the place where there is a very viable disease model, and that would open a lot of doors. It may not be a panacea or the golden key, if you will, but it's certainly going to be helpful to the entire Sarc space, and benefit, I think, research on a go-forward basis. So we're excited about it. There's some updates on it in our annual report and on our website. We've published some pieces about the specific research projects that were done and who did them, and it's been, that's been well received. So that's one avenue. There's a lot of different avenues too that we're working on.
Well, but the difference between now and finding a cure at the end of the day is money.
Yes.
Because you've got to support the research, and we got to keep the staff in place, and we've got to make sure that the world knows about sarcoidosis, and we've got to support the patients who have it in the meantime.
Yes.
So what can people do if they're listening, or let's say a pharma CEO decides he wants to listen to the Sarc Fighter podcast,
right?
and he's intrigued, or she. So what is the pitch to these folks for money, or at the grassroots level, how can people help?
Yeah, so I think it obviously any support is welcome always. As an organization, we need people, as we said previously, patients who are talking about the disease, coming together and using their collective voice. So I think that's very important. And you as an advocate, the role that you play within your community, within the whole country, is very valuable, because that patient voice does matter to the pharmas and others, whether it's a government agency or a for-profit company. It does matter, because they need to know what the patients are experiencing with the disease. They need to know how to obviously run a trial, or they run a trial that needs patients. So if a patient is out there and they can participate in a trial, that's very helpful. If a patient is out there and they can serve as an advocate and educate others, whether it's a local doctor who may not know a lot about Sarc, or other patients who don't know a lot about Sarc but have the disease, that's super valuable. Yeah. The other thing that's a benefit, obviously, is helping us raise funds. So on a local basis, if you're doing a walkathon or a bikeathon, I know you're a cyclist, folks have very creative minds, and we're here to help them run those local fundraisers if they want to. So for example, this year, we typically have walkathons in April. We had to postpone that because of COVID. We're doing a bunch of virtual walks later this year. And so those virtual walks will allow people on a local basis just to go out with a group of friends. They can social distance and still do a walk that raises money in their local community that benefits FSR. So that's the key component too. And then we're out there, just again, trying to meet with people and talk to donors, and whether it's a major donor or a smaller donor, but every little bit counts, obviously, along the way. And those resources help us attract other resources. And it's not necessarily that FSR has to raise all the money. If we raise enough money to create that awareness and to work with our other partners in the disease space, the collective resources are really what matters, not so much just what FSR raises.
The collective voice and making it big and making sarcoid big.
Right. Well, and so to what extent do you feel like FSR has been successful from its humble beginnings to where it is today?
Well, it's Andrea and I look at each other, and I think, we're very proud of the legacy of FSR, and we realize that it's not us.
No, it's not the Reading and Andrea show at all.
No, it's so much
everybody
more.
Who's been a part of it. It's you.
It's every patient, all the dedicated team of people that are working there every day. Obviously, the clinicians, the doctors, our pharma partners. It's
the
grown.
Ambassadors. It's
grown
everybody.
So much, and we want it to continue to grow. Our goal is not to hold on to this as our little baby and never let go of it. It's we want to see it blossom, and I think the next 20 years, our goal is to hopefully find a treatment that is going to be a much better form of treatment for patients, more effective, fewer side effects, and just continue to build this momentum faster around helping patients with their treatments. And I think that would be a legacy that we'd love to leave behind.
And to be out of business. I would say that in staff meetings, and people are like, what?
No
You're
kidding.
crazy. But I think, no, you know what? Our goal is to be out of business.
Right.
So
Andrea, how are you feeling now, 20 years into sarcoidosis, or 20 plus years?
Physically or emotionally?
Either one, because I think they're not too far apart.
I think emotionally, I feel so much, I feel relieved. I think initially going into it, I was terrified. I felt this big mountain of fear on my back, thinking, oh my God, what is this? Am I going to make it? And I think now I feel as though I have just an army of physicians that I can call basically at any time. And I do feel as though I feel as though I have options. And I went the sort of alternative route. I don't know if you know that whole situation, and I feel as though I incorporated that into my plan, and that has helped me immensely. That has really changed my life.
Okay, I don't know about the alternative route, so you're going to have to share a little bit about that. Is that okay?
He's going to.
Do I have time?
Banging at the door.
Oh,
of course. So the reason we're in California, you could just let her in. Reading, just let her in. So the reason we're in California, we were in New York and then Chicago. We were in Chicago for about 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically I was having, I've had a heart attack and 2 strokes. And basically after my second stroke, I was in just terrible pain. Woke up with just horrible head pain, trigeminal neuralgia. And decided I have a dear friend who lives in California, and she basically convinced me to come out to California and work with her physicians here, alternative doctors. So I came out and eventually ended up moving out here for a year with our daughter, and doing electric stim acupuncture and completely changing my diet, gluten, dairy, sugar, corn, nut, legume free, and sort of what I called the prison diet. And it changed my life. And so we ended up moving out here a few years later. And I've basically stayed on that regime without the electric stim acupuncture, but I'm just doing that as needed. And, staying really pretty green and gluten, dairy, and mostly sugar-free.
And in addition to your other medications.
Right. And in addition to most of my medications, but I'm off of pretty much all of my pain medications. So, yeah. Yep. So, but I was on 7 major narcotics that were prescribed to me by a pain clinic in Chicago. And, I did not have any quality of life for a couple of years there. So that has been, living sort of the green life has been amazing.
Because every time I ask a doctor, can I change my diet and help this? They all say, nah, that doesn't make any difference. There's no research to support that.
Yep, that's exactly what I was told. And one of the top doctors that I have immense respect for said, well, you go do that crazy stuff in California and good luck to you. So I did, and I came back and he was wowed. He was like, geez, really? And so it worked. And
that was the symptoms of the stroke, but what about the breathing, the pulmonary sarcoidosis? How is that resolved?
I have no idea. To be honest,
I mean, necessarily, but
yeah, I think I am still breathy. I mean, when I exercise and when I walk with friends, they always give me the old, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, I'm fine. I'm just kind of breathy." And it does, when I walk with people, like they do sort of get nervous, but it's fine. I mean, I power through it.
Yeah.
I think what we've learned is that, there are certain diets that, are less inflammatory, or certain foods that are less inflammatory to your body. And, again, we're not medical experts, but, just logically, if you can reduce inflammation in your body, I think that's maybe something that benefits you. And
right.
Hopefully it's benefited Andrea. She incorporated acupuncture with some of the, Western medicine that she's being treated with. And, maybe just finding that balance, a little bit of everything, and everybody's different. So we're not trying to promote a certain way of treatment here, but everybody's different. And I think when you have Sarc, the one thing that we learned is to be open-minded about, trying things that might be different, trying things that might help in addition to obviously working with your clinicians to, to do what they know best, and use some of the drugs that are helpful for patients. But it's a trial and error process. There's no formula. Right.
And I know that my acupuncturist out here, he is very, well, not very, he's against a lot of Western medicine, and said that, maybe I should go off of my medications. And I said, no, I can't do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, you've got to keep things.
Sure. I've been to 2 different acupuncturists here in Roanoke, Virginia. And I my issue is that I have a big lesion on my spine right here at the base of my neck. And so I have basically lost the sensitivity to touch from here to my feet, to some extent. It's not 100%, but so I was trying to reconnect some of those nerve endings with the acupuncture, and I went through it for quite a while, but I didn't find any difference. But they were telling me the same kinds of things. We'll talk about your diet and do this and do that. And honestly, I really don't know how. And I bet you there's a lot of people who don't know how, and maybe under a different in a different hour we can talk about, Andrea, all the things that you've discovered while you were in California. Because
I'd love to. Yep.
I actually mentioned in my last podcast that I wanted to reach out and I wanted to hear about how diet might affect Sarc.
Definitely.
Right.
I'd love to help you with that.
Not knowing that was one of the avenues that we would go down today. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
That's a great sidebar. We'll chat.
it really is, because it deserves its own podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, the whole anti-inflammatory food thing, and I don't think I could go off my medicine. I'm currently taking Imuran and Humira. And I spent a whole year on chemo, which was Cytoxan and prednisone, which I bet you that's what you had when you were. Is that the chemo drug that you took?
I was on methotrexate,
Yeah.
Imuran, and there was something else, and I was also on Humira.
Yeah. So, it's kind of working for me as far, because I haven't and when I don't have a flare, I feel like that's a win. And
absolutely.
So to that extent, it's working. But when I walk around every day, I still have all this numbness, but I think that's just permanent damage to my spinal cord. So that's probably not going to change. But so the win is not getting worse.
Right. Yes. That's true. All right. Well, we'll talk offline about some other potential ideas.
All right, that sounds good. So the last thing I want to touch on, Reading, is that you are, as of this recording, the interim executive director of the foundation.
Yes.
And you've sort of stepped in to fill that role until such time as a new CEO can be found. And I understand that you're very close.
Yes. Yeah, we formed a CEO search committee with the board, and the chair of that is a woman by the name of Mary Cobb, who lives in New Jersey and has a sister with sarcoidosis. Mary's been a very trusted, valued board member. But we have a great search committee. We did the search on our own, as a matter of fact. We were uncertain whether during COVID people were going to be looking for new jobs, or how the world would evolve. And so we actually did the search on our own and sourced, I think, about 45 very highly qualified candidates, winnowed the pool down. And as you said, I think we have 2 or 3 candidates right now that we're very focused on and we feel could be terrific leaders for the organization on a go-forward basis, hopefully for the next 2 decades or so. And hopefully we'll have that decision in the books, sometime in the next couple weeks. So it's exciting.
It's so exciting.
It's been weird during COVID. It's like doing these Zoom interviews and trying to get to know someone where you're not necessarily in the same room and can read body language and things of that nature, but it is the real world. And so we've embraced it.
Yeah.
But it's actually good to bring it sort of, I don't know. It's been exciting.
Okay.
It really is a labor of love. I have to say, this whole, with growing pains, but it is, we love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
It's overwhelming, but we love it.
What do you think will be the next domino that will tumble as we look forward 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the fight against Sarc? What would be considered the next victory?
I think there will be some compounds that get to market that are new, and I think there will be some advancement there. I really do. We're working with some companies now that are focused on developing compounds that could be new and different. And I think that there's a good chance that 1 or 2 could get there. Still a long process, still lots of unknowns and ifs, but I think that could really be neat. I think some of our researchers are going to garner some major attention with their ideas from and funding from the NIH with our with us filling the gaps, with FSR filling the gap to give kind of momentum to some of these researchers. I think that will be beneficial. And I think the third thing is you're going to see new faces in sarcoidosis in terms of professionals. Part of our goal is to bring new thinkers and young investigators into the disease space and help them build careers in sarcoidosis, whereas before they might have said, oh, I want to go to cancer, or I want to go research some other disease. I think we have, we're doing a better job recruiting, if you will, these people, these brilliant people to the sarcoidosis space. So I think those 3 things are really going to, I think those will be three hallmarks. And so, we're just working, on a lot of different fronts. But to answer your question, I think that's where we'll see some changes.
For instance, that.
I don't.
Okay.
I mean, there are a lot of folks that are out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the podcast is always open whenever you have something you want to announce. So
You're very kind to share your time with us.
I know. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you. When I started this, the thought that I might be interviewing you guys or Dr. Bob Boffman or
We love him.
This has kind of grown from my little grassroots effort to now we've got some reach, and the more we can put it out there, the more that the Sarc Fighter podcast can be a part of the solution. Then that's the only reason I'm doing it. So
exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time today. Andrea, good luck with the treatments. We'll talk further about the California approach.
Absolutely. John, anytime if you have time after this, I'm happy to talk.
I do actually. So,
okay.
And Reading, hopefully you'll be off the hot seat soon.
Yeah, exactly. I like the hot seat. It's kind of fun.
I'm going to fire him.
Okay. Good.
I'm going to fire me.
I'm going to fire you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Be well.
Thanks again to Andrea and Reading Wilson for coming on the Sarc Fighter podcast. Andrea mentioned some of those dietary restrictions that she's put herself on, as well as some of the sort of Eastern medicine techniques she is using to keep Sarc in check, and she has agreed to share some of those with me that I might try them. In fact, we had a quick follow-up phone call after the interview today, and I'm already very interested in some of the things that she's working on, but we'll have more about that in a future episode. And of course, if I try into those and if they work for me, I'll be happy to share them with you, and maybe you can go along with me on that journey, and maybe you can try this as well. And Andrea has said that she'll come back on because I want to talk to her on a separate podcast about just some of the things that she has done to keep sarcoidosis in check. And believe me, she has been down the road. If you listen to the interview, she's had the chemo, she's taken all the drugs, she's familiar with all the Western medicine, and she is still using a lot of Western medicine, or some, in addition to what I'm calling the California treatment. And she laughs and calls it the same thing that she's using right now. The bottom line is it appears to be working for her. So we do have that to look forward to. Remember, the Sarc Fighter podcast is uploaded early in the morning every other Monday, so set your appointment book for each new episode, and please share this on social media wherever you can, and let's get the word out and continue to fight this disease together. That's all for this time. Until next time, keep fighting.